Dawn broke over the frost-kissed battlements of Winterfell, painting the ancient stones in rose and gold. In the hush before the stirrings of servants and soldiers, Sansa Stark walked the parapets alone, her furs drawn close and her red hair loose in the wind. The world below was wrapped in mist, but her thoughts soared far from home, seeking meaning in the cracks of her family's battered legacy. A raven had arrived in the night, bearing a seal as blue as the Baratheon stag, and as new as the summer grass after a storm. Lady Stark, the parchment read, written in a bold and unpracticed hand. The words beneath were less polished still, yet honest in their intent. Sansa read it thrice, the same feelings returning with each scan: confusion, hope, and a fluttering terror she dared not name. He was Gendry Baratheon now, Lord of Storms, and by decree of Daenerys Targaryen, and by the will of the small folk who remembered the black-haired king with a hammer and laughter in his voice. He had been a bastard once, like Jon, and like Jon, the world had risen up to demand something of him. Sansa tried to remember the last time she had seen him. Was it in the courtyard, after the long night, when the fires still smoldered and the living walked as if waking from a nightmare? Or was it before, when Arya spoke of him in hushed tones, her smile softer than she realized? Now he wished to marry her. Not for love, he said plainly, though he remembered her kindness in the crypts and her strength at the council fires. Not for power either, for his realm was as battered and empty as hers, Storm's End rising out of the battered marches like a drowned man coughing up salt. No, he wished for alliance. The Stormlands and the North, united not by Targaryen fire or Lannister gold, but by the old oaths, by the ancient roots sunk deep into Westeros' broken earth. Sansa stared into the dawn, the wind cold on her cheeks. She knew what must be done. She was the last true-born Stark, and the North looked to her for guidance. Jon was gone, king in the far north, if rumors from the Wall could be believed, though she knew his heart would never belong to any crown. Arya had vanished west of the Sunset Sea, and Bran. Bran was everywhere and nowhere, lost in the woods and the weirwood's whispering song. Sansa turned from the edge, the letter crumpled in her gloved fist. She had grown up dreaming of a gallant knight, of songs and flowers and chivalric love. The songs had died at the Twins. The flowers had been trampled in King's Landing. And love was a shadow in the snow. But duty remained, cold and clear. She descended the steps, the castle stirring to life beneath her, and made her way to Maester Wolkon's tower. A raven would fly before midday, bound for Storm's End. She would accept Lord Gendry's proposal, for the sake of peace and the future that must be built from ruin. The journey south was a trial of its own. The road from Winterfell to White Harbor wound through woods still haunted by whispers of the dead, and the banners of House Stark rode ahead of her like the ghosts of another age. Sansa traveled in a carriage lined with fur, guarded by knights and soldiers sworn to her house. With her rode Ser Brienne of Tarth, her shield and her friend, tall and silent in blue steel, and Podrick Payne, now grown into a quiet and capable squire. They passed through towns rebuilt since the war, and villages struggling to shake off famine and fear. Sansa stopped often, listening to the pleas of small folk who begged for grain, for justice, for hope. Each night she wrote letters to Winterfell, sending aid where she could, feeling the weight of her land and people settle more heavily upon her shoulders. In White Harbor, she was greeted by Lord Wyman Manderley, his jowls shaking with laughter, and his banners bright with green and silver. He pledged his loyalty to House Stark and pressed her to stay for feasts, for games, for the politics that never truly slept. Sansa smiled and endured, but pressed onward, her mind always wandering south to the storm-beaten cliffs and the man who waited there. They sailed from White Harbor with a convoy of ships, one bearing the direwolf, another the merman, and a third, empty of sigils, carrying the hopes of two kingdoms. The narrow sea was treacherous, but the weather held, and the salt spray filled Sansa's lungs with the taste of adventure. She had rarely traveled by sea, and the sight of dolphins leaping through foam brought a rare smile to her lips. Even Brienne, so often dour, seemed lighter. her blue eyes watching the horizon for threats and possibilities. When at last they rounded the Cape of Wrath and Storm's End appeared, a gray crown atop the cliffs, battered by waves and wind, Sansa felt her heart thud with anticipation and unease. The castle was nothing like Winterfell, its stones slick with salt and its gates carved with the stag and crown. The banners hung limp in the rain, but as Sansa's party approached, horns sounded and the gates groaned open. Gendry met her in the yard, flanked by knights and squires with blue and gold on their tabards. He was taller than she remembered, broad-shouldered and sun-browned, his hair a wild mess beneath a silver circlet. He bowed low, not the polished grace of a courtier, but the honest, awkward bend of a blacksmith who had never truly shed his forge. "My lady," he said, voice rough as gravel, "welcome to Storm's End." Sansa inclined her head, her own voice soft but clear. "My lord. Thank you for your hospitality." She studied his face, seeking the boy Arya had once spoken of, the friend who had run with her sister through mud and fire. Instead she found a man, wary but resolute, his blue eyes searching hers with hope and fear, and the faintest trace of amusement. "Come inside," Gendry said, offering his arm. "It's not fit for man or wolf out here." He nodded to Brienne, who watched him with suspicion and the glint of approval. "Sir Brienne, you honor us with your presence." Brienne blushed, bowing awkwardly. "My lord, my lady, Ben Nawand." The halls of Storm's End were carved from the bones of the cliffs, dark and echoing, warmed by fires that crackled in every hearth. Gendry led Sansa to the great hall, where a feast awaited. Fresh fish, roast boar, bread still warm from the ovens. The food was plain but plentiful, and the people watched Sansa with curiosity and hope. She spoke little, listening instead to the cadence of the Stormlands, the rhythm of lives lived close to the edge. After the meal, Gendry escorted her to a solar overlooking the sea. The room was sparse, a desk littered with ledgers and maps, a battered warhammer mounted above the hearth. Gendry poured wine, his hand steady despite his nerves. "I won't pretend I know much of ruling," he began, staring into his cup. "My father, well, I never knew him. I was raised in Flea Bottom, learned the trade from a smith, but I've seen enough lords and kings to know what doesn't work." He looked up, earnest. "I want this alliance, Sansa. Not just for the Stormlands or the North, but for all the people who lost everything in the wars. If we're to build something better, it has to start with us." "None." Sansa sipped her wine, studying him in the firelight. She saw no cunning in his face, no guile, only the sincerity of a man unaccustomed to masks. She set her cup down and folded her hands. "You're right," she said. "Westeros has been ruled by tyrants and fools for too long. We cannot change the past, but perhaps we can shape the future." She took a breath. "I accept your offer, Gendry Baratheon. Not as a prize to be won, but as a partner in rebuilding our realms." Relief flooded his face, mingled with disbelief. "Thank you, my lady. I'll do my best." She smiled. Small and genuine. That is all anyone can do. Word spread quickly. By morning, ravens flew from Storm's End to every corner of Westeros. The Lady of Winterfell would wed the Lord of Storm's End, binding north and south with vows and hope. The Northmen grumbled, as they always did, wary of southern ties. The Stormlords muttered, uncertain of a Stark among their ranks. But both peoples remembered the wars, the hunger, the endless winter, and they dared to dream that peace might take root in the blood-soaked earth. Preparations began at once. Seamstresses arrived from the Reach, their carts laden with silks and lace. Cooks worked day and night, roasting game and baking pies. The yard was filled with the sound of hammers and laughter as banners were mended and the ancient keep scrubbed clean of moss and salt. Sansa walked the halls each day, meeting with stewards and captains, learning the rhythms of Storm's End as she had Winterfell. Gendry spent his days among the smiths, forging gifts for his bannermen, daggers of fine steel, buckles engraved with stags and deerwolves. He was more comfortable with a hammer than a quill, but Sansa saw the pride in his work, the respect he earned from the men who served him. At night, They met in the solar, sharing wine and stories. Sansa spoke of the north, of snowbound winters, and the old gods who watched from the weirwoods. Gendry told tales of the Stormlords, of Robert's drunken rages, and the laughter that echoed through the halls in brighter days. They spoke of Arya, both missing her with a longing neither could voice. Slowly, something like friendship bloomed between them. Sansa found herself smiling more easily, her burdens lightened by Gendry's stubborn optimism and his refusal to be awed by her titles. He listened when she spoke, never interrupting, never dismissing her fears. When she woke in the night, haunted by the ghosts of Ramsay and Joffrey, she found comfort in his steady presence, the warmth of his hand in hers. The day of the wedding dawned wild and bright. The wind tore at the banners atop the keep, and rain lashed the windows, but inside the great hall, candles burned in their thousands, and the air was thick with music and joy. Lords and ladies came from all corners of Westeros. Lord Royce from the Vale, Lady Manderley from White Harbor, Sir Davos Seaworth from the Narrow Sea, his eyes bright with approval for the boy he had once smuggled. The Septon's words echoed through the hall as Sansa and Gendry joined hands, the direwolf and stag standing side by side before the gods. "With this ring, I bind you," Gendry said, sliding a band of silver onto her finger. "With this vow, I promise to stand by you, now and always. With this ring, I bind you," Sansa replied, her voice steady as the sea. "With this vow, I promise to build with you, now and always." The hall erupted in cheers, the music rising to meet the storm outside. Brienne wept openly, and even Sir Davos wiped his eyes. Sansa felt the weight of the north upon her shoulders, but also the strength of new roots taking hold in rocky soil. She looked at Gendry and saw not a king or a lord, but a man willing to fight for the world they might yet create. The days that followed were filled with councils and plans. Sansa and Gendry ruled together from Storm's End, sending out envoys to the north and the Stormlands, mending fences and forging alliances. They listened to the pleas of the small folk, sent aid to the villages still reeling from war. Sansa brought order and wisdom. Gendry brought energy and the trust of men who saw themselves in his rough hands. Together, they faced old enemies and new challenges. The Ironborn raided the coast, testing the new alliance. Sansa sent word to the north, and Manderley ships sailed south to join Baratheon longships. The combined fleet drove the raiders back, and peace settled over the shores for the first time in years. In the north, there were grumblings from the old lords, Karstark and Umber, never happy to bend the knee to southern blood. Sansa rode north with Gendry at her side, braving the cold and the suspicion. In the great hall of Winterfell, she spoke with the strength of a true-born Stark, promising that the north would remain free, its traditions respected. Gendry swore before the old gods, kneeling in the snow, his brow pressed to the earth. "I am no king," he said, his breath misting in the icy air. "But I will serve the north as I serve the Stormlands. I am your ally, not your master." One by one, the lords relented. Peace returned, and Sansa returned south, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Seasons passed. The snows melted, and crops grew thick and strong in both North and Stormlands. Trade routes opened, and coin flowed between White Harbor and Shipbreaker Bay. The scars of war began to fade, though Sansa knew they would never disappear entirely. Gendry grew into his role, learning to navigate the treacherous waters of politics, as he had once learned the heat of the forge. He sought Sansa's counsel in all things, and she, in turn, trusted him with her fears and hopes. Their partnership deepened, rooted in respect and a shared vision for the realm. Children followed. A boy with dark hair and sharp gray eyes, a girl with Sansa's fire and Gendry's laughter. The castle rang with their footsteps, and for the first time in a generation, Storm's End was filled with life and hope. Word spread of the peace between North and Stormlands, and slowly, other lords sought to emulate their example. The Vale sent envoys, seeking trade and alliance. The Riverlands mended old wounds, sending their sons and daughters to serve as pages and wards at Storm's End. Even the Reach, still reeling from the loss of Highgarden, reached out with tentative hands. Through it all, Sansa and Gendry remained partners, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing, always united in purpose. When disputes arose, they faced them together. When tragedy struck, as it did when a fever swept through the marches, they mourned and rebuilt, side by side. Years passed. The faces in the hall changed. Children growing tall and old lords fading into legend. Sansa grew wiser, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp as ever. Gendry's hands never lost their calluses, though he set aside his hammer more often for the quill. Together, they built a legacy not of conquest, but of peace. A union of direwolf and stag, of winter and storm. And so it was that the North and the Stormlands, once rivals divided by ancient grudges and new wounds, became as close as kin. Under the rule of Sansa Stark and Gendry Baratheon, Westeros began at last to heal. The snows and the storms would come again, as they always did. But for a time there was warmth in the halls, laughter in the fields, and hope in the hearts of those who called the land home. Years gathered in quiet layers over Storm's End, salt and wind, and the bright laughter of children smoothing the roughest edges of stone. In time, Sansa and Gendry's union was spoken of in a tone bordering on reverence, and the two kingdoms, long divided, battered by 100 ambitions, moved toward a unity deeper than banners or coin. There were days of work and nights of gentle intimacy, and if the world beyond the walls threatened, they faced it as they always had. Together, fortified by trust and a hard-won sense of peace. The morning broke bright and clear as a bell the day the first envoys from the Vale arrived, white wings flaring over the green battlements. Sansa met them in the great hall. Her children ranged about her, a little lord and lady already, straight-backed, their father's dark hair and her eyes. They bowed and she rose, a winter rose in the heart of the Stormlands. Sir Zimond Arryn, lean and hawk-eyed, presented his credentials and a chest of gifts. Vale steel, airy silk, a brace of falcons hooded and fierce. "My lady," he intoned, "Lord Robin sends his highest regards and asks for your wisdom in matters of trade. And if you please, counsel on a match for his young cousin, Aelys." Sansa received them with grace, conscious of the eyes upon her. Stormlander Northmen, even the serving girls, who would one day tell their own children of the Queen in the Stormlands. Stark and Baratheon united. "You honor us," she said, and her children watched, learning what it was to rule not with fear, but with an open hand. Gendry, for his part, met the envoys later in the Solar, with the windows thrown open to the sound of the sea. He had learned to balance a lord's demands with a craftsman's pride, and while he deferred to Sansa's judgment in most matters of court, he had become, by necessity and nature, his own man. Sir Simon marveled at the new forges Gendry had built, where Stormlander and Northmen worked side by side. Not just weapons, but hinges and plows, and the fine steel chain of a new maester's collar. "Your lady wife rules with words and law," Simon observed. "You rule with the strength of your hands." Gendry only grinned, wide and self-effacing, but something in him stood straighter, as if the compliment, awkward as it was, had struck to his core. "We're of one mind," he said, "and that's more than I ever thought I'd have." As the seasons changed, the alliance proved itself not in grand battles, but in the slow, ceaseless work of healing a realm. Storm's End became a place of gathering. Northern lords with their heavy cloaks and thick accents, Stormlander knights with wind-burned faces, Riverlander merchants bearing furs and fish. The old kitchens bustled, and the Solar was never empty of counsel or laughter. Sansa, always cautious, reached out to her bannermen in the north, encouraging their sons and daughters to spend a season at Storm's End. She wrote letters in her own hand, gentle but firm. "It is time our children learn the ways of the South as the South learns the ways of the North." Few could refuse her, and so the walls filled with young people. Umber and Manderley, Baratheon and Dondarrion, playing at swords in the yard and listening wide-eyed to stories in the firelight. It was not always easy. At times the differences between North and South flared, sharp as new-forged steel. Once, a brawl broke out in the hall. Two boys, an Umber and a Connington, fists flying over some insult neither could recall the next day. Sansa herself separated them, her voice colder than a White Harbor winter. But later she found Gendry sitting on the steps with the two, explaining, in terms simple and plain, how every kingdom had bled and every house had lost. "You fight, you break," he told them. "But when you build together, the wall stands taller. My father built with a hammer. Your mother's built with will. We build with both." The boys listened, chastened, and the next morning were seen patching a fence together. But resolve. Not all wounds could be so quickly mended. News came from the west that the Ironborn had raided the coast again. Smaller attacks than before, but the threat lingered like the taste of blood in the air. Sansa and Gendry held council by firelight, summoning their captains, sending ravens to the north. When Lord Manderly answered with ships and Lord Baratheon with knights, it was a message written not just in steel, but in unity. One night, after a long council, Sansa stood at the window overlooking the restless sea, her hair loose about her shoulders, silver threads glinting in the lamplight. Gendry joined her, setting a warm hand at her waist. For a while, they stood in silence, listening to the crash of the waves. "It never stops," he said quietly. "Ruling. Fixing. Fighting. It doesn't," Sansa agreed. "But this..." She gestured to the flickering torches below, the distant shouts and laughter. "This is what we fought for. Not crowns, not thrones. This..." He turned her in his arms, and she smiled. "Tired but true. I would have you beside me in every storm," she whispered. "We are stronger together." And so it was. When the Ironborn came again, they found the coast ready. Baratheon banners snapped above the cliffs, Manderly ships blocked every cove, and Stark archers lined the battlements. The battle was fierce but brief. Afterward, Sansa walked among the wounded, tending with her own hands. Gendry rode the length of the shore, heartened by the sight of his people, North and Stormlands both, working as one. Word spread. The North and the Stormlands had not just joined hands, they had woven themselves together, house by house, oath by oath. In the years that followed, the children grew. Young Edric, named for a storm lord of old, was clever and bold with his mother's keen mind and his father's easy humor. He trained at sword and bow, but it was the forge that drew him most, and Gendry delighted in teaching him the art of steel and fire. He learned to work with Northman and Stormlander alike, and the men respected him, for he bore the look of a Baratheon but the heart of a Stark. Lady Lyara, their daughter, was as willful as Arya and as graceful as Sansa, a child of winter and storm. She rode with the Dondarrion boys, bested the Manderly girls at chess, and watched the world with sharp, assessing eyes. Sansa saw in her the makings of a ruler, strong, just, and wise beyond her years. Other children, too, filled the halls. Wards from the Reach, the Riverlands, even the Crownlands, sent by parents eager to tie themselves to the new order. The corridors of Storm's End rang with laughter, with clattering feet and the bright shouts of youth. But darkness never vanished entirely. Far in the south, rumors stirred of old enemies gathering, seeking to test the alliance. In King's Landing, Queen Daenerys' grip on the Iron Throne was strong but not unchallenged. Sansa watched with wary eyes, remembering how quickly fire could spread through dry grass. It was on a cold evening, as storms battered the keep, that a raven came from King's Landing. The Queen herself requested an audience at Storm's End. Her dragon would remain outside the walls, but her retinue would be large. Sansa felt a chill at the words. She knew Daenerys well enough to recognize the steel beneath her courtesy. Preparations began at once. The kitchens were thrown into chaos, guest rooms aired and supplied. Banners hung anew. Gendry checked the defenses himself, leaving nothing to chance. Sansa met with her council, reviewing every message, every rumor. "We must show unity," she told them, "and strength. but never arrogance. The day of the Queen's arrival dawned wild and blue, the skies torn by wind. Daenerys Targaryen rode in at the head of her company. Silver hair streaming, violet eyes sharp as swords. Her retinue gleamed, unsullied and Dothraki. Knights and ladies, all proud and bright as a dragon's eye. She was greeted with all honor. Gendry knelt, as custom demanded. But Sansa did not bow. She met Daenerys' gaze with the calm assurance of one who had survived every fire. There was a moment of tension, a breath held across the whole hall, and then Daenerys smiled, sharp and thin. "My Lady Stark," she said. "Or should I say Lady Baratheon?" "Both, Your Grace," Sansa replied. "We are north and south, winter and storm, bound together for the realm's peace." Daenerys nodded, but her eyes swept the hall, weighing every face, every gesture. The days that followed were thick with meetings, feasts, polite jests that edged toward threat. The Queen spoke of trade and justice, of fealty and the good of the realm. Sansa answered each point with poise, reminding all that the North had never knelt easily, but was loyal when respected. At night, she and Gendry spoke in quiet tones, reviewing every word, every nuance. "She does not trust us," Gendry said once, voice grim. "She never will," Sansa replied. "But she cannot break us if we stand together." It was Lyanna, bold and guileless, who changed the tone. She befriended one of Daenerys' handmaidens, a girl from Volantis, and the two were seen laughing together in the courtyard, trading stories of dragons and deerwolves. The Queen watched them once, something flickering in her eyes. Regret, perhaps, or memory. The visit ended as it had begun. With courtesy, with gifts, with promises. Daenerys departed, her dragon's shadow crossing the walls, and Storm's End breathed easier. Sansa knew the peace was fragile as spun glass, but she also knew it would hold. For now, life returned to its rhythms. Edric spent a year in the north, learning the ways of winter from his Manderly kin. Lyanna traveled to the Vale, hawking with the Arryns and writing letters home in a bold looping script. Sansa and Gendry ruled together, their partnership a quiet, constant strength. The years grew kinder. Harvests were good, the storms less fierce. Sansa planted gardens along the battlements, roses and snowdrops blooming together. She established a council of wise women, Stormlanders, Northerners, even Dornish and Reach ladies, who traveled north to learn and teach. The council advised on disputes, on law and custom, and soon other keeps copied their example. Trade thrived. Grain and wool from the north, fine horses from the Stormlands, salt and fish from the coast. Sansa established a fair in Storm's End, drawing merchants from Old Town, Lannisport, Gulltown. The realm grew richer, not only in gold, but in kinship. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Gendry took up his hammer again, working in the forge with Edric or a trusted apprentice. Sansa would watch, hands folded, her heart light. "You still love it?" she said once as sparks flew. He grinned, sweat streaking his brow. "A lord's duties are heavy, but a hammer's honest. And you, my lady?" She reached for him. Her smile, soft. "I love what we've built. I love the peace we've made." They stood together, watching the fire burn down. For a moment, there was no north or south, no duty or crown. There was only the promise they'd made, long ago, to build something better than what had come before. When news came, as it always did, of trouble, of bandits in the Kingswood, of quarrels in White Harbor, they faced it side by side. Sansa wrote letters in her clear hand, dispatching justices and riders. Gendry rode out himself when the roads were rough, earning respect not by decree, but by deed. Their children grew and flourished. Edric was fostered for a season in the Riverlands. Lyanna spent a winter in Dorne. They returned wiser, stronger, each carrying a piece of the wider world back to Storm's End. Sansa watched them with pride, knowing that the North and the Stormlands would be united not only by their marriage, but by a generation raised in peace. Old friends came and went. Brienne visited, her hair touched with gray, always welcome at Sansa's table. Davos Seaworth brought his grandchildren, telling tales of dragons and the Onion Knight. Even Arya, wild and changed, appeared one spring, sunburnt and windblown, bringing gifts from lands no Stark had ever seen. They feasted, they argued, they planned. Storm's End echoed with new songs, and for a time, it seemed the worst was behind them. But peace, Sansa knew, was always bought dearly, always watched over by those willing to defend it. As the children of the realm played in the sun, she looked to the future, a future built not on war, but on unity and hope. Winter would come again, as it always did. But when it did, the North and the Stormlands would stand together, stronger than ever before. On the eve of the Midwinter Festival, Storm's End shimmered in a glow of torches, banners snapping in the icy winds off Shipbreaker Bay. Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell, and now the stalwart of the South, moved through the stone halls, her breath steaming in the air, her heart buoyed by the sense of purpose the years had given her. Beyond the windows, the sea roared, wild as ever. A reminder that peace was never a gift but something won and defended. Tide after tide, night after night. This year, the North had come south in greater numbers than ever before. Lords and ladies wrapped in furs and heavy velvets crowded the keeps, their voices mingling with the Stormlanders in the torchlit halls. The festival had become a tradition, the union of two once rival kingdoms, marked by song and feasting, by contests of skill and stories, traded long into the night. Children of mixed blood, half wolf, half stag, played together in the courtyards, and the cooks cursed the cold as they roasted whole boars in the ancient kitchens. Edric Baratheon, heir to Storm's End in the north, now 16 and tall as his father, led the opening games, a hammer slung at his hip. His hair was black as a raven's wing, his eyes the gray of a northern storm. The crowd roared as he bested a burly Stormlander in the wrestling pit, then grinned and pulled the man to his feet, his laughter as free as summer rain. Lyanna, wild and flame-haired, was already at the archery butts, her northern blood showing in her focus and poise. She loosed arrow after arrow, splitting the bullseye twice. Her kin from White Harbor and Las Hearth, cheering with delight. Sansa watched her daughter from the shadows, pride and a strange sadness welling in her. Lyanna had blossomed in Storm's End, fearless, clever, a true-born lady of two worlds. Gendry watched the children with a smith's eye and a father's awe, his arm around Sansa's waist as they stood atop the ramparts. "They're strong," he murmured. "Stronger than we ever were." Sansa's lips curved in a private smile. "They're what we dreamed for. They're the proof we did not break." Bam! Below them, the festival raged on. Bonfires crackled, and mead flowed in rivers. Stormlander boys danced with Manderly girls. Stark men toasted with Baratheon knights. The old wounds of the realm had scabbed and scarred, and though they would never be wholly forgotten, they no longer ruled the hearts of the young. As night thickened, Sansa made her way through the crowd, greeting guests, bestowing favor and wisdom in equal measure. She listened to tales from Bear Island, heard grievances from the Rainwood, smiled at the bashful squire who presented her with a delicate carving of a wolf and stag in twine. Her court had become one of story and counsel, of justice as sharp as ice and kindness as steady as the dawn. But the world beyond their festival was not idle. News had arrived from King's Landing. Queen Daenerys, grown increasingly restless, was sending envoys north and west, pressing for more taxes, more fealty, more signs of submission from her great lords. There was unrest in the Reach, muttering in the Westerlands, and talk of pirates off the Arbor and Dorne. Sansa knew that the old game was always waiting to be played anew. On the second day of the festival, as the dusk crept in, a company of riders approached Storm's End under banners of green and gold. A delegation from High Garden, long silent since the fall of House Tyrell. Sansa received them in the solar, Gendry at her side, her children watching from the shadows. Lady Alarie Fossaway, regal and proud, led the company. "My Lady Stark, Lord Baratheon," she greeted them, her voice honeyed but edged with purpose. "High Garden seeks friendship and counsel. We are beset by bandits and harvest blight. Our people remember the old alliances, the old strength of the realm united." Sansa welcomed them with all courtesy, offering bread and salt, then wine and warmth. As the evening drew on, Lady Alarie leaned close, her words for Sansa's ears alone. "There is talk in the reach of rebellion. The Queen demands too much. Her unsullied garrisons grow. Her dragons fly more often. Your union, your peace, it inspires my lady. But it frightens the Queen. Some say she will strike the North and Stormlands together, to break you before you can rise further." "Then?" Sansa's eyes darkened. She had known the threat lingered, even as her lands prospered, and her counsel grew in wisdom. "If Daenerys comes for us, she will not find us alone. The North and the Stormlands stand as one, and others may follow." Lady Alarie sipped her wine. "If rebellion comes, we would stand with you. But we cannot move first. The Reach has seen too much fire." Gendry joined them then, brow furrowed. He listened as Sansa recounted the words, then offered his own counsel, practical and honest. "We will not provoke the Queen, but we'll be ready. Let your people know our gates are open to trade, and to news. What one kingdom suffers, all may suffer. If the time comes, we'll act together." Lady Alarie nodded, satisfied, and took her leave. Sansa watched her go, feeling the cold settle in her bones despite the fire. Later, in the quiet of their chamber, Sansa and Gendry spoke in low voices. "We must prepare," Sansa said, eyes fixed on the flickering shadows. "If Daenerys feels threatened, she may come with fire." Gendry nodded, his hand finding hers. "We'll not cower. The North never has. But we'll need more than swords and ships. We'll need hope and unity." Sansa pressed his hand to her lips. "We have both. We have each other." In the days that followed, the festival became a council. Lords and ladies from across the realm met in secret, sharing fears and pledging aid. Sansa and Gendry moved among them, sowing seeds of alliance, reminding them of the peace their union had brought. Edric and Lyanna, now nearly grown, listened at doors and learned the arts of politics as deftly as they wielded blade and bow. A message arrived from White Harbor. Lord Wyman Manderly's health was failing, and his grandson begged Sansa to send a healer. She dispatched her best, sending Edric north as her voice and eyes, knowing he would return stronger and wiser for it. In his absence, Lyanna took a greater role at court, her counsel valued by all who heard her. As the spring winds warmed the stone of Storm's End, Sansa received word that the Queen's banners had been seen along the Roserad. Daenerys, it seemed, was preparing a progress, ostensibly to visit the Reach, but in truth, Sansa suspected, to measure the loyalty of her lords. Sansa called her council, laying out her plan with characteristic clarity. "We will welcome the Queen with all honor. We will show her our unity and our strength. But we will not bend beyond what is right. We rule here, north and south. She will see that we are not weak." The preparations were careful and deliberate. Messages were sent to the Vale, the Riverlands, even to Dorne. Allies were reminded of oaths, and banners readied. Gendry oversaw the strengthening of the harbor. Lyanna organized the welcoming feast, her mind sharp for any hint of intrigue. The Queen arrived in a blaze of banners, her dragons circling overhead. Daenerys herself rode at the head of her army, regal and untouchable. She entered Storm's End with a retinue of Unsullied and Dothraki, but her eyes lingered on the courtyards, where northern and southern children played together, and on the Great Hall, where banners of direwolf and stag hung side by side. Sansa greeted her with all respect, but with no hint of deference. At the feast, they sat side by side, two queens, one by birth, the other by marriage and will. Throughout the visit, Daenerys probed, questioning Sansa's counselors, praising the prosperity of the land, but noting more than once the size and training of the Stormlander Northmen forces. She asked after Edric, now in the north, and Lyanna answered smoothly, her wit cloaked in charm. There was tension, to be sure, and on the third night, Daenerys summoned Sansa to her chambers. "You rule well, Lady Stark," the Queen said, her voice soft but hard as diamond beneath. "But I sense ambition. The realm cannot bear another war." "Oh." Sansa held her gaze, unflinching. "Nor do I wish one. We have peace because we rule together. We prosper because we honor old oaths and build new bonds. The people do not hunger, and the land is healing. Why threaten what works?" Gendry studied her, a flicker of something. Envy, perhaps, passing through her eyes. "Peace is fragile. I have learned that lesson again and again." Sansa did not look away. "So have I. Which is why I will fight to keep it." They parted with cold courtesy. The Queen departed 2 days later, her dragons wheeling overhead. As her banners vanished into the horizon, Sansa felt the weight of the encounter settle like frost upon her heart. It was then the rumors began. That Daenerys had left spies behind. That she intended to divide the North and Stormlands by sowing dissent. That she would strike soon with dragons and steel. Sansa acted swiftly, calling her council, redoubling the watch on the gates and the coasts. Gendry sent trusted captains along the Roserad and to the southern ports. Edric returned from White Harbor, taller, his northern accent a touch deeper, bringing news of further unrest in the Vale and the Riverlands. The time for unity had never been more crucial. Sansa summoned her lords, north and south, to Storm's End. The hall was packed with warriors and wise men, with young ladies and old veterans. Sansa spoke, her voice ringing clear as the wind on the battlements. "We stand at a crossroads. The Queen mistrusts our peace and our strength. She may come against us, or she may only wait, seeking a weakness. There will be no weakness here. We are North and Stormlands, united not only by marriage, but by blood, by hope, by a dream for a realm healed at last." "Men of mine." Gendry rose beside her, his hammer in his hands. "We do not seek war, but if war comes, we will answer. For our children, for the land, for the chance at a future, better than what we were given." The lords cheered, and for the first time in generations, the North and Stormlands spoke as one. The weeks that followed were tense. Daenerys' spies were rooted out. Her agents sent back to King's Landing with polite warnings. Trade continued, and for a time it seemed the Queen might relent. Sansa poured her energy into strengthening alliances, holding councils by firelight, and preparing for every possibility. As spring blossomed along the cliffs and wildflowers bloomed in the meadows, Sansa found herself walking the ramparts with Liara, watching the sea crash below. "Do you ever wish things were simpler, Mother?" Liara asked, her voice serious for once. Sansa smiled, brushing a wind-blown strand from her daughter's face. "Sometimes. But then I remember, nothing worth building is ever simple." "Then?" Liara leaned her head against Sansa's shoulder. "If it comes to war, we will face it together," Sansa promised. "You, me, your father, your brother. This is our home, and I will see it stand." The sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold and crimson, and the two stood in silence, their hearts heavy but resolved. For the dream they had forged in the crucible of hardship was too precious to be abandoned. When night fell, and the world seemed poised upon the edge of knife, Sansa Stark lay beside her husband and found comfort in the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. She had known suffering and loss, betrayal and pain, but here, in the shadow of Storm's End, with the sound of waves and wind, she had also found strength, not in solitude, nor in the cold splendor of power, but in the stubborn, unyielding hope of those who dared to believe in peace. And as the storms raged beyond the walls, the North and the Stormlands stood, not as rivals or strangers, but as kin, united by blood, by will, and by a love that would not be broken. The summer that followed Queen Daenerys' visit was the warmest in living memory. The sky over Storm's End so often clear and blue that the cliffs seemed to soften, their lines blurred by mist and sun. Wheat grew tall in the fields, and the market swelled with goods: salt cod and northern wool, glass from the Dornish deserts, silks brought from Bravos by bold captains. Sansa would ride down to the harbor at dawn, her daughter Liara at her side, watching the ships dock and unload, listening to the babble of tongues, each one another proof that the North and the Stormlands had become a crossroads of the realm. Word of the peace and prosperity spread far beyond the reach of their banners. Wandering bards, never short of a tune, sang of the Lady of Winterfell who tamed the storms and the blacksmith lord who wed the wolf. Some stories were wild, even foolish, a dragon chained in the crypts beneath Storm's End, or a secret council of witches advising Sansa on the tides. The truth, quieter and harder, was this. The realm's children were learning what it was to live without the shadow of war, and mothers no longer woke in the night to count their sons. But summer never stays. Letters arrived daily from distant corners, many penned in nervous, hurried script. The Queen's court at King's Landing grew more isolated, her retinue ever larger, her punishments ever sharper. Lord Robin Arryn sent word that the Vale was restless. Hawks trained for war more than for the hunt. The Riverlands writhed with old grievances, small folk whispering of vanished heirs and lost justice. It was Edric, Sansa and Gendry's son, who brought the first certain proof of what Sansa had always feared. He rode in from the north after nearly a year at White Harbor, taller and broader, his jaw shadowed with a first beard, his eyes set in the gray of his mother's family. At the evening meal, before all the household, he knelt at his mother's side and whispered, "Mother, they are gathering men in the neck. The Queen means to break our power." The room hushed. "What?" Liara set her cup aside, and Gendry's hands stilled where they gripped the table. For a moment, Sansa remembered every meal ruined by bad news. Her father's silence in the Red Keep, her mother's trembling hands at River Run. But she was older now, and the fire within her had been hammered to steel. "We do not panic," she said softly. "We prepare. Liara, see that the gates are watched. Edric, ride to Shipbreaker Bay and alert the fleet. Gendry, you will meet with our captains. I will send ravens to our bannermen, and to our friends in the Vale and the Reach." Nah. Before the candles guttered, the castle was alive with purpose. Old weapons were drawn from racks, their edges honed by Gendry himself, and the drill yards echoed day and night with the shouts of men and women who had not forgotten how to fight. The children of Storm's End, half North, half Stormlander, trained together, their bond tested and found strong. Sansa watched them from the solar, feeling both pride and a sharp, silent ache. She had wanted to spare them the world's ugliness, but she had also taught them never to look away from it. She sent letters by fast ship and sure horse to every lord who had broken bread with her, to every lady who had sat on her council. She wrote to Robin Arryn in her own hand, invoking the old pact between Stark and Arryn. To Wyman Manderly's grandson, promising trade and aid if he could keep White Harbor secure. To Lady Ellery of Highgarden, recalling the promise made in shadows during the winter festival. For 3 weeks, no answer came. The sea was stormy and the winds ill. Sansa and Gendry met nightly in the solar, weighing each rumor and each silence. Then, on a morning filled with gulls and gold sunlight, ravens arrived all at once. The Vale would send 2,000 men and supplies, their banners to fly beside the direwolf and the stag. White Harbor promised ships, and Highgarden quietly pledged rain and horses. Dorne sent only a short note. "We watch, we remember." Sansa read this last with a twist of a smile. She had never trusted the Martells, but she had learned the value of patience. By late summer, King's Landing made its move. Daenerys' armies, clad in gray and red, advanced up the Roserade under the banners of the crown. At their head marched Lord Greyjoy and his Ironborn, promised gold and a free hand along the coast. The Unsullied moved like a tide, silent and implacable, while the Dothraki circled the flanks, their war cries carrying on the wind. Rumors of dragons abounded, but neither Drogon nor Rhaegal were seen. The Queen, it was said, would not risk her children so far from the capital unless all other means failed. Instead, it was fire and fear, the old game, played once more. Sansa called her council, every chamber filled, the weight of so many lords and ladies a palpable thing in the air. Gendry stood at her right, Edric at his side, Liara at her left, the image of a family united. She spoke quietly, never raising her voice, never pleading. "We stand not as conquerors, but as keepers of the peace. We will not march on the queen. We will defend our homes, and the gates will not be closed to those in need." She dispatched riders to the villages, opening Storm's End to refugees. The North, she knew, would do the same. It was their way. The Reach sent wagon loads of grain, the Vale their best archers, and Manderley's ships blockaded the gullet. A silent threat in the night. The Queen's army drew close, her commanders demanding that Storm's End open its gates and surrender Sansa and her family. The answer was returned by Edric himself, riding out under a flag of truce. "We are the North and the Stormlands. We are not traitors, but we do not kneel." The siege began. For weeks, the Queen's men battered the walls and sent arrows arcing over the battlements. The Unsullied, grim and silent, tried to undermine the gates. But Gendry's new iron portcullis held firm. The Dothraki rode up and down the coast, burning villages, but found little more than empty houses and salted wells. Sansa's people, forewarned, had retreated behind her walls or into the thick forests, where the North scouts knew every path. It was a hard season, but not hopeless. Edric commanded the defense with a steadiness beyond his years, learning from Gendry's old veterans and the northern men alike. Liara tended the wounded, her quick hands as skilled with herbs as with the bow, her courage a fire that would not dim. Sansa herself moved among her people, never idle, never distant. She heard every complaint, comforted every child, and stood every morning upon the ramparts, so the Queen's army could see her unbowed. Word spread, as it always did, that the Lady of Winterfell was as cold as the wall, but as enduring as the sea. Through it all, Gendry was her shadow and her shield, working alongside the smiths at night, walking the walls with Edric by day. In the dark hours before dawn, he would find Sansa at the window, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her back straight as ever. "We will outlast them," he promised, his hand on her shoulder, strong and warm. "I know," she replied, her voice a whisper. "But I fear what will come after, Gendry. Even if we win, the realm is cracked. It cannot bear another wound." He kissed her brow, the gesture as steady as the tides. "Then we will heal it. One day at a time, like we always have." The turning came not with a charge or a dragon's scream, but with a whisper on the wind. A rebellion in the Reach. The Queen's men in Old Town mutinied, refusing to march against their own kin. In the Westerlands, Goldcloaks turned on their officers and claimed to serve the true peace, invoking Sansa's name in the streets. The Vale sent fresh troops, their banners flying above the Stormland fields, and the Queen, her own forces divided and her supplies threatened, was forced to parley. It was not a triumphal moment. The Queen's envoy, a gaunt knight of House Redwine, met Sansa and Gendry in the shadow of the gates. "Her Grace will accept terms. The army will withdraw if you pledge not to march on King's Landing or support her enemies." "No." Sansa looked to Gendry, then to Edric and Liara, then back to the envoy. "We have never sought the throne. We wish only peace and the freedom to rule our own lands as we always have. We will make no move against the Queen, so long as she makes none against us." The siege ended quietly. The Queen's men withdrew, battered but unbroken, the Ironborn slinking away to their ships. The small folk emerged from the woods and caves, and life, stubborn and hopeful, crept back into the fields. Storm's End stood, its banners tattered but proud, its people weary but alive. Sansa called her council, this time in the open, inviting every lord and lady, every merchant and tradesman who had contributed to the defense. The hall was packed, and when Sansa spoke, her voice was not only strong, but full of hope. "We have survived fire and blood, winter and storm. We are united, not by fear, but by trust. This is what the realm should be, a family, not a battlefield." Then sat a wall. Cheers echoed in the hall, and when Gendry raised his hammer in salute, it was not as a threat, but as a symbol of their hard-won unity. The years that followed saw the slow healing of the land. The Queen, chastened by her failures, ruled more wisely, her hand less heavy, her ear more open to counsel. The north and Stormlands flourished, trade growing, the roads safe, the harvests generous. Sansa's court became a model for others, a place where women spoke and were heard, where young and old worked side by side. Edric, now a man grown, rode as his mother's envoy to every corner of the realm, forging friendships and alliances that would last beyond his own lifetime. Lyanna turned her talents to justice, sitting in judgment over disputes, her reputation for fairness spreading from Dorne to the Wall. Sansa and Gendry, gray now, their children grown, watched from the ramparts one spring night as the torches wound along the cliffs, the old songs rising to meet the waves. "Do you regret any of it?" Gendry asked, voice soft. She took his hand, her eyes shining with tears and joy. "Not a day, not a moment. We have made something that will outlast us." Bell. And in the peace that followed, the longest the realm had known in 100 years, the children of Direwolf and Stag carried their legacy forward, the world itself gentled by the stubborn hope of those who refused to let it break. Above Storm's End, the stars wheeled in silent witness. The storm passed, and for a time at least, peace held. Autumn came softly, wrapping Storm's End in mist and gold. The heat of the siege faded into memory, its scars fading from the stones and from the hearts of those who had endured it. The battered banners were replaced with new ones, the direwolf and the crowned stag stitched side by side, rippling in the wind from rampart to rampart. In the morning, Sansa stood in her solar and watched the sun rise over Shipbreaker Bay. The water touched with bronze, and in those tranquil moments, she thought often of what they had risked and what they had saved. The people who lived within her walls, the children of North and South, the old families and the newly may, felt the hush of peace descend. No riders at the gates, no whispers of dragons overhead. The harvest was late but full, and every evening the kitchens were bright with laughter and the promise of warm bread and honeyed apples. The courtyards filled with the noise of training, the clangor of wooden swords, but it was practice now, not desperation. Edric, now 20, commanded the garrison with the calm of one who had seen true battle and would not be awed by less. He made the rounds at dawn and dusk, every guard knowing him by name, the men and women trusting him for his even temper and his willingness to hear their complaints. He was Gendry's son, but also Sansa's, and that meant his judgments were fair and his hands slow to anger. Sometimes Sansa would stand above the yard, her shawl wrapped tight, and watch her son drilling the squires. He'd call out, "Remember, it's not the biggest sword that wins, but the surest arm and clearest head," and she'd smile knowing he'd learned wisdom from both father and mother. Lyanna, 19th, seemed to flit everywhere at once, her wild hair now gathered in a Stormlander braid, her cheeks flushed from sun and wind. She rode the estate's boundaries with the rangers, often vanishing for a night or two, returning with a deer slung over her saddle or news of poachers or lost travelers. She was beloved by the small folk, who swore she could calm any horse and mend any quarrel. There was talk in the yard of proposals. Young lords from the Vale and the Reach sent trinkets, but Lyanna laughed them off. "I'm not a prize in a tourney," she'd say, tossing a ring or ribbon to her brother's waiting hand. "I am a Stark of Winterfell and a Baratheon of Storm's End, and I'll run where the wind calls." Sansa admired her daughter's spirit, but it was her kindness that most moved her. Lyanna organized the autumn fairs, made sure orphans had cloaks and boots, took time to teach reading to the cook's son and the washerwoman's daughters. She had inherited Sansa's eye for detail and her father's open, guileless heart. Sometimes, in the deep of night, Sansa would find Lyanna at the hearth, reading old letters or tracing maps, dreaming of the world beyond the reach of the tides. Gendry thrived in peacetime, no longer forging blades for battle, but plowshares and locks, strong hinges for doors and clever tools for farmers. He set aside days each moon to work in the smithy, sleeves rolled up, hair sweat-plastered to his brow. Children gathered to watch, marveling as sparks flew, and Gendry would let them try the bellows or shape a nail, their giggles echoing off the stone. For all his strength he was gentle, quick to praise, and when a task was done, he'd share a drink and a story as if he were just another craftsman. He and Sansa met each evening in the solar, their hands sometimes stained with ink or soot, their faces lined with care but lit by contentment. They spoke of the day's doings, of new irrigation for the barley fields, a quarrel among the kitchen maids, a storm-damaged roof at the outer stables. They read letters from the north, sometimes from Arya, who wrote from distant lands of mountains and oceans, never saying where she would go next. There were letters from the Vale, from Lady Ellery and the Reach, even, now and then, from King's Landing, where Queen Daenerys ruled in isolation, her council grown smaller and quieter with each passing year. It was on one such evening, as the sea wind rattled the glass, that Sansa found herself writing a long letter to Bran, the king beyond the wall. She described the peace, the laughter, the new children born that year, the hope that grew like ivy through every crack of her home. She sent it north by the fastest riders, wondering if her brother would read it with his own eyes, or simply see it in the firelight of the weirwoods. Winter came at last, but gently, the storms less fierce than feared. Sansa rode out with Gendry to oversee the bringing in of wood and grain, the last apples plucked before frost, the cows sheltered in their sheds. At night, they gathered in the great hall, fires leaping high, with minstrels singing and storytellers spinning out tales of the long night and the first kings. Sansa insisted that the children, highborn and low, all have a place at the fireside, and Gendry would often lift the littlest onto his lap, their eyes wide as he recounted his days as a smith's apprentice in King's Landing. On the night of the first snow, Sansa gathered her council. Edric, Lyanna, Maester Tommen, Ser Brienne, old now, her hair silvered, but her arms still strong, and Lord Manderley's grandson come south to serve as squire. They spoke of roads to be cleared, of trade caravans stalled by the frost, of a sickness spreading among the cattle in the far west. Sansa listened, gave her orders, and closed the meeting with words that would be carried on to every hearth. This is our time of watchfulness, not of fear. We have endured worse, and together, we will endure whatever comes. As the months passed, news came from King's Landing. First, that Lord Varys had died, his spies scattered or sworn to other causes. Then, more troubling, that the Queen had withdrawn even further from the world, her dragons rarely seen, her handmaids replaced by mute guards. The city grew restless, the gold cloaks enforcing curfew, food prices climbing with each new proclamation. Sansa read these letters with care, sometimes discussing them with Gendry, sometimes simply sitting by the window, thinking of what it meant for her children, for the realm. Edric, ambitious but never rash, suggested sending trusted men to the Crown Lands to offer quiet support to the small folk there. If we feed them, Mother, if we show them there is hope, the Queen cannot turn them against us. Sansa approved, and soon wagons from Storm's End and White Harbor moved along the roads to the capital, bringing flour, salted fish, even small casks of honey and ale. The people whispered thanks, and Sansa's name was spoken with gratitude behind every closed door. As winter deepened, a tragedy struck. A fire in the village below the keep, started by a careless lantern, took 3 houses before it was stopped. Lyanna led the rescue, her cloak singed and her hair wild, carrying 2 children from the smoke herself. In the aftermath, Sansa visited the charred ruins, promising aid to rebuild, her presence as steady and real as the stone beneath their feet. It was after the fire that a stranger arrived, an old man, bearded and bent, his eyes sharp as flint. He called himself Sir Maynard, and claimed to have served the old king, Robert, in his youth. Sansa welcomed him, offering a seat at the hearth, but she watched him with caution. Over the next weeks, Sir Maynard proved himself useful, fixing broken tools, telling stories of the Baratheon past, and, slowly, sharing tales of the capital. He brought news of unrest, of a conspiracy brewing among the city's merchants, of lords gathering quietly in the alleys and squares, remembering better days. Sansa summoned her council again, and they debated long into the night. Should they act? Should they reach out to the conspirators, risking the Queen's wrath? Or should they hold fast, trusting that the realm would turn in time? Gendry spoke last, his voice as plain as ever. We must be true to what we have built. We do not seek the throne, but we do not turn our backs on those who suffer. If the realm needs our help, we give it, but not for power, never for that. Let them see that peace can be stronger than fear." Sansa agreed. She wrote to King's Landing, to the Reach, to the Riverlands and Dorne, asking for patience and offering support. Grain, tools, wisdom, not swords. She met with Sir Maynard by the fire, asking his thoughts on the men who grumbled in the shadows. "They do not want another war, my lady," he said, "but they will not endure hunger and cruelty forever. You offer hope, and that is a dangerous thing for a ruler who leads by fear alone." The winter waned. The snows melted. The roads cleared. Edric led a convoy north to Winterfell, bringing Lyanna with him, and the reunion of the two kingdoms was celebrated with games and feasts, with gifts of fur and salt, with laughter echoing in the halls of both keeps. When they returned south, the first green leaves budded on the apple trees, and Sansa stood again on the walls, watching as the world renewed itself. Gendry came to her side, his hands rough, his face aged but handsome as ever. "The realm stirs," she said quietly. "It is not peace, not truly, but it is closer than we have seen in our lives." He drew her close. "We'll hold fast. We've weathered worse storms, and whatever comes, we'll face it as we always have, together." In the years that followed, Sansa's children became the heart of the new realm. Edric traveled as far as the Wall and as far south as Sunspear, forging bonds, settling disputes, learning the language of every lord and every commoner. Lyanna established schools and healers' houses, her laughter as fierce as her justice. Sansa and Gendry grew old side by side, their love quieter but deeper, their presence a steady beacon to those who looked to storms and for hope. As her hair silvered and her eyes grew wise, Sansa often walked the battlements at dusk, thinking of all she had lost and all she had found. She saw the faces of those she loved in every child who played in the yard, in every new flag raised above the keep. She knew that the world would never be free of strife, but she also knew that unity, once forged in suffering and hope, could last longer than steel, longer than any crown. And when, at last, quietly, in her bed, the sea whispering at the windows, and her family gathered close, it was said that Storm's End mourned as one. From Winterfell to Oldtown, from the Vale to the green fields of the Reach, stories were told of Sansa Stark Baratheon, the lady who healed two kingdoms and taught a realm that peace, once chosen, could be made to endure. Edric and Lyanna took up her mantle, strong and gentle, true to the lessons of their mother and the strength of their father. And so, in time, the North and the Stormlands stood not just as allies, but as kin. Proof that even in a world born in blood and fire, the quiet, stubborn work of unity could change everything. Okay. The memory of Sansa lingered in every hall and garden, every field and harbor, under the banners she'd united. Edric Baratheon, now Lord of Storms, End and Warden of the North, bore the weight of that inheritance not with fear, but with a quiet determination that made men and women trust his word as if it were oak and iron. It was the first spring after his mother's death, and the keep brimmed with life. Lambs on the hills, boats on the bay, green banners and blue, and faces from every corner of the realm returning to honor her. The hall was dressed for the first spring festival since the long war years. It was Edric's first as lord, and he'd sworn it would not be somber. The Northmen came on shaggy horses, bearded and smiling, their axes put aside for the feasts. Stormlander knights carried flowers instead of spears. Manderley and Dondarrion, Mertens and Karstark, lesser houses from the Reach, even a tall golden-haired woman from Lannisport, who claimed kinship with the extinct Lannisters. Everyone answered the call, not out of duty, but memory. Edric welcomed them in the great hall with Lyanna at his side, her eyes keen and shining. She was as beloved as her brother, tireless as a storm, and after Sansa's death, she had thrown herself into every corner of castle and land, riding to remote villages, listening to disputes, refusing to be honored above the humblest child. The feast began with songs for Sansa, and even the rowdiest knight grew silent as an old bard. White-bearded and trembling, sang of a direwolf and a stag meeting on the shore in moonlight, forging something stronger than either could alone. Edric listened, remembering Sansa's soft voice in the solar, the way she'd read letters aloud in winter's dark, always speaking of duty with a gentleness that was never weakness. When the music rose, he lifted his cup. My mother showed us another way. Let us honor her not with tears but with joy. Let every banner here remind us, we are not a realm of strangers, but a family by choice. Cheers rang out. Liara led the first dance, spinning among knights and squires, her laughter ringing like bells. The festival spilled into the courtyards, torches flaring against the deepening dusk. Cooks roasting meat and children chasing painted eggs through the grass. Old rivalries softened. Young love began in shy glances between a Stark ward and a Baratheon page. Edric, making the rounds, gave time to all, listening, promising, advising as his mother would have done. As the night deepened, Liara slipped away from the lights, taking her cloak to the ramparts. Edric followed, finding her leaning on the stone, her hair wild in the wind. Heard from Arya? She asked, her tone light but eyes searching the darkness. Not in months. She sent a carving, though, a bird with one wing folded. She never explains her gifts. Do you ever wish you could leave? Liara asked. Just go. No banners, no duties, no feast days. Edric smiled, watching the lanterns flicker below. Mother once told me you could never run from who you are. If you try, you just find yourself waiting when you get wherever you're going. No, I wish for more peace, fewer sick children, better roads in the north. But I do not wish to leave. Liara nodded. Good. I do enough running for us both. Damn tea. They stood in silence, letting the sea wind tug at their cloaks. From the keep below, music drifted upward. Laughter, a snatch of an old northern song. Edric thought of all his family had built, and for a moment, pride and loss mingled in his chest until he could not tell one from the other. The spring festival ended, but its warmth lingered. The castle bustled with preparations for the planting. Tractors from the reach, clever new plows designed in the smithy, seeds sorted and blessed by septons and northern wise women alike. Edric joined the work, sleeves rolled, boots muddied, his laughter as common as the small folks. Liara spent weeks traveling between villages, settling disputes, brokering marriages, ensuring the poorest had seed and tools. One morning, a rider arrived from King's Landing. A slim, sharp-eyed woman bearing the Queen's seal. The Queen, she said, was ill, her voice little more than a whisper now, and the city restless. Unrest stirred in the Crownlands and the western river valleys. Food shipments from Old Town had ceased after a flood, and pirates plagued the narrow sea. Edric summoned his council. Liara, Maester Tommen, old Sir Brienne, now called the Maiden of Three Kingdoms, her legend grown enormous in song. Several Stormlander lords, and a Manderly envoy. The Queen's message was less demand than plea. Send food and aid, or the capital would fall into chaos. We have no love for the Iron Throne? But if King's Landing falls, the realm may shatter. Edric nodded. We remember the last time the city starved. He looked to Liara. How much can we spare? She already had the figures in her ledger. Grain, salted fish, casks of apples and honey. If we ration and trust the next harvest, we can send a third of what we have. And our people will not starve if the weather holds. But there will be complaints. Edric nodded, then looked to Brienne. You will lead the convoy. Take banners of both houses. Let it be known the North and Stormlands come to aid, not to conquer. Brienne grinned, old and fierce. No one would mistake me for a conqueror. I'll keep the city in line. Da. The convoy set out, wagons long as a river, guarded by knights and archers. Lyanna went with them as Sansa would have, riding at the front, banners streaming, her voice carrying hope at every village they passed. As they neared King's Landing, they saw the Queen's banners flying, but the gates were ringed with hungry faces, children and old men alike. Lyanna rode forward, Brienne at her side, and demanded entry. The Queen's counselors hesitated until Brienne, with the bluntness of her years, threatened to break the gate herself. They were admitted, and the food distributed, not to lords or gold cloaks, but to the small folk first. For days, Lyanna moved through the city, meeting women in the ruined septs, listening to grievances, hearing whispers of the Queen's failing health, and the power struggles already breaking out in the shadows. On the third night, she was summoned to the Red Keep. The halls were quieter than she remembered. Half the guards gone, the court shrunken. Daenerys Targaryen received her in a chamber lined with dragon banners, her hair now streaked with white, her eyes hollow but still proud. "You are Sansa's daughter," Daenerys said. "I remember you as a child." Lyanna knelt, but not in submission, out of respect for the crown and the woman who had worn it through fire. The Queen spoke softly, her voice little more than a breath. "The realm will change when I die. Tell your brother, the peace your mother built must hold. The lords will squabble, but if you stand firm, they will follow." Lyanna promised, and the Queen's eyes closed. "You have your mother's courage," Daenerys whispered, "but do not let it turn to steel. Remember mercy." Then Lyanna left the chamber with tears in her eyes and rode through the city at dawn, watching as the word spread. First among the gold cloaks, then in the markets and alleys. The Queen was dying. She returned to Storm's End as the leaves turned, bringing news of the Queen's last command. Edric received it quietly, then called his council once more. "The Iron Throne will be contested," Maester Tommen warned. "There are claimants, bastards in the Stormlands, a pretender in Old Town, a lord in the west, who claims descent from Tommen Baratheon. If the peace is to hold, you must be ready." "Them?" Edric, older now, more certain, shook his head. "We will not seek the throne. We will stand as a haven for the realm's weary, and let others squabble over iron and gold. If the lords wish peace, they know where to find it." Lyanna watched him, pride in her eyes. "And if they bring war? Then we stand together as always, wolf and stag, north and storm." Word spread. As the Queen's death became certain, envoys came from every corner, some seeking support for their cause, others begging for mediation. Edric met each with courtesy, but made no promise of arms. Instead, he urged them to send their sons and daughters to Storm's End, to speak, to bargain, to learn peace at the same tables his mother had once set. Slowly, grudgingly, the realm began to bend. The Reach, exhausted by floods and crop failures, wanted no more war. The Riverlands, half ruined by bandits, sent daughters and gold. Even the Vale, with its hawks and cold pride, sent its youngest Aaron to be fostered. A great council was called at Storm's End. For months, the keep swelled. Lords and ladies, septons and smiths, old soldiers and cunning maesters. Lyanna hosted debates by candlelight, settling quarrels, brokering marriages, demanding every child, highborn or low, be given a lesson in the common tongue and numbers. Edric walked the walls with his captains, always vigilant, always fair. When word came at last that the Queen was dead, the realm waited for a call to arms. None came. Instead, Edric and Lyanna stood before the assembled council, offering not conquest, but compromise. "Let us choose together a council to guide the realm," Edric said. "Let no one house claim dominion, but let all voices be heard." There were grumblings, threats. But slowly, a new way took hold. The small council became the first of many, with lords rotating in service, the small folk sending their own advocates. Lyanna's schools flourished, and the north sent grain to the Reach. The Stormlands sent timber to the Riverlands. The Vale offered iron and gold. Trade flourished. Disputes, though fierce, rarely turned to blood. The North and Stormlands, bound by memory and blood, never sought the throne. Yet it was their example that endured, a lesson Sansa Stark and Gendry Baratheon had taught by patience and sacrifice. When the new realm rose from the ashes, it did so not under a dragon nor a lion, but with banners showing a direwolf and a stag, side by side, rippling in the winds of peace. Years later, old and gray, Edric would walk the battlements, his grandchildren at his side, and tell them of a mother who taught him gentleness was the truest form of strength. In distant lands, Arya would hear the tales and smile, knowing her sister's legacy had changed the world. And the bells of Storm's End, for the first time in living memory, rang not for war or mourning, but for hope, a hope carried forward by every hand that sowed a seed, by every child who learned to read, by every lord who chose unity over pride. The world would change again, as it always did. But as long as direwolf and stag stood together, there would be peace in the realm. The realm entered a new era not by the shattering cry of war, but by the slow, persistent blossoming of hope. As spring ripened into summer, Storm's End, long a fortress against chaos and sea, became the beating heart of a realm learning at last to put down roots and trust in tomorrow. No king or queen ruled now. The council at Storm's End, born of Sansa's vision and Edric's patience, governed through debate, trade, and hard-won trust. The old lines had blurred. Where once men had killed for banners, now sons and daughters of different houses shared bread in the same hall. Children with hair black as midnight and eyes the color of ice played in the same fields as golden-haired, olive-skinned heirs from the Reach and Dorne. Lyanna, restless as ever, often said this was what she had dreamed of in the cold years of her childhood. A realm where no one is only north or south, just of the realm, just of the land. Edric's days began early, his sleeves rolled, his boots thick with dew as he walked the fields beside his steward and the children of small folk who had grown into trusted aides. He listened to the farmers, to the masons and the smiths, his word as good as gold coin in any market. At council, he presided with humility, rarely raising his voice, and his reputation for even-handedness brought envoys from distant harbors seeking treaties or advice. One midsummer morning, a ship from Braavos arrived bearing a delegation of magisters and traders. The city had heard, through whispers and songs, of a new peace in Westeros, and wanted to see it with their own eyes. They brought gifts, silk, rare dyes and books bound in gold leaf. At the welcoming feast, the Master Magister remarked, "In Braavos, the coin rules all. In Storm's End, it seems trust is more valuable." Edric smiled. "Coin built your city. Trust built this realm from ruin. We have need of both." The Braavosi stayed the season, their scribes taking notes, their merchants striking deals with everyone from Manderley woolmongers to Dornish winegrowers. Lyanna, never content to sit long at a table, rode with them to the marshes and the distant towns, showing them the thriving villages, the granaries built in the lean years and now overflowing. The Braavosi marveled at the unity, but Lyanna told them, "It took generations of pain. The peace we built is not an accident, but a promise kept every day." As summer waned, Lyanna led a party north, answering an invitation from Winterfell. The journey home brought a flood of memory, snow crunching underfoot, the cold bright and alive, the sky wide and merciless. Winterfell itself was bustling, Manderley and Glover banners over the yard, and new buildings rising beyond the old walls. Arya had returned briefly, her face weathered by years at sea, her eyes keen as ever. She embraced Lyanna, laughing. "You run this place now? I remember when you wouldn't stop crying if your bread was burned." Lyanna grinned. "And I remember when you taught me to throw a knife in the snow. Maybe we'll have a contest." They sparred in the yard to the delight of the assembled court, Arya quick as ever, Lyanna strong and patient. When the contest ended, Arya took her niece's hand and led her to the Godswood. There, under the red leaves, Arya spoke softly. "You could have been queen if you'd wanted. they would have followed you. I never wanted a throne, Liara replied. I want the world to be safe for children with no banners. I want mothers to sleep through the night, and old men to die warm and fed. Arya squeezed her hand, her voice thick. You're your mother's daughter, through and through. Their time at Winterfell ended in feasting and gifts. The North was strong, and Liara's presence reminded every lord that their fortunes rose and fell together. She rode south again, her heart full, knowing the ties she'd helped weave would not easily fray. At Storm's End, Edric had welcomed another wave of envoys, this time from the Riverlands and the Westerlands. The Lannister name was gone, but new families had risen. Gold was still mined, but the mines now funded irrigation projects, not armies. There was an air of humility in these envoys, and a willingness to listen. The greatest challenge came late that autumn, when a plague swept the narrow sea and reached Old Town and the Arbor. Sickness struck with terrifying speed, claiming dozens, then hundreds. Maester Tommen sounded the alarm at council, and Edric did not hesitate. Send every healer we have. Open the granaries. No one starves. No one is turned away at the gates. Liara rode to the afflicted towns herself, overseeing the care and the burial of the dead, refusing to allow fear to gain a hold. It was a dark season. The peace felt fragile, and old hatreds threatened to rise with the panic. Some lords locked their gates and hoarded food. But Edric and Liara's example shamed them. Stories spread of the lady who tended the sick with her own hands, the lord who sent his own children to aid strangers. When the plague at last receded, the realm mourned, but did not splinter. Edric led a memorial in the fields below Storm's End, reciting every name sent by every village, every holding. We remember, so we do not repeat the old darkness, he said, his voice carrying over the heads of thousands. We heal, so that peace does not become complacency. From that day forward, a new custom took root. Every year at harvest, the lords of the realm sent lists of their lost to Storm's End, where the names were read aloud and candles lit along the walls until the sea itself seemed ablaze with memory. Time moved on. The council at Storm's End grew to include men and women from every corner. Lawborn, highborn, even merchants and smiths. Children who had grown up together became young men and women who saw themselves not as enemies, but as neighbors. Disputes still flared, over trade, inheritance, love. But they were settled at council, not by the sword. The great experiment of unity became the expected way. When a dispute in the Vale threatened to boil over, Edric sent his own son, named Robb after Sansa's brother, to mediate. The boy came home triumphant, a falcon feather in his cap, and a new treaty sign. In Dorne, Liara's foster daughter brokered a trade pact with Sunspear, bringing Dornish olives and wine north for the first time in a generation. Liara never wed, though she was courted by lords and ladies alike. I am wedded to the land. She laughed, and to every stubborn, hungry child in it, she became a living legend, the lady without borders, as at home in White Harbor as she was in the marches. Edric, meanwhile, married a reach girl with clever eyes and a talent for numbers. Their children, 3 in all, grew up running wild through both snow and surf. As the years turned and Edric's beard silvered, he began to think of legacy. He called Liara to his solar one blustery evening, the fire warm, the air thick with the smell of applewood. Are you happy? He asked her. This life, this endless riding, all these burdens. She looked at him, her smile gentle. I am. I miss Mother every day, but I think she'd be proud. You've made this work, Edric. You brought them together. The council. These people, they trust you. They trust both of us, he said. But it is not forever. One day, someone will try to seize it all for themselves. I want to be sure the peace we've built can weather storms yet to come. Liara nodded. Then we train them now. Not just our kin, but any with the will and heart. We teach them what it means to rule. How to listen, how to yield, how to be merciful. So they did. New schools were founded in every region, not just for numbers and letters, but for the art of compromise, the history of the realm, the meaning of justice. The council at Storm's End took apprentices, chosen not for blood, but for merit and kindness. In time, other strongholds copied the example. Winterfell, Highgarden, even distant Oldtown. As Edric's strength waned, his eldest Robb began to take the lead at council, always deferring to his father's wisdom, but adding his own keen insight. Lyanna became the realm's guide, traveling the roads, carrying news, comfort, and challenge where it was needed. The North remained strong, the Stormlands wise, the rest of the realm bound by the invisible threads of trust and memory. Edric died as he had lived, quietly, his family around him, and the sound of the sea in his ears. Robb, grief and pride mingling, stood before the council and pledged to follow his father's path, to keep peace and mercy at the heart of the realm. Lyanna, white-haired and weathered, watched from the ramparts, her heart full. "Mother, father," she whispered to the wind. "It worked. We kept your promise. The world is different now." That winter, as storms battered the coast and snow fell thick on Winterfell's towers, bells tolled in every town and keep. From Dorne to the Wall, the people gathered, not in fear, but in gratitude, for a family that had refused to choose power over peace, for the stubborn work that had turned enemies into kin. And so the realm endured, season after season, year after year, proof that even in a world forged by war, hope and patience, trust and unity could grow roots deeper than blood, stronger than steel. The direwolf and the stag still flew together, above walls that had once bristled with spears, and now rang only with laughter and song. Okay. The first true snow of winter fell softly over Storm's End, a rare hush settling over the keep. In the dawnlight, the banners of the direwolf and stag gleamed white with frost, and all around, children tumbled in laughter, catching flakes on their tongues, their shouts echoing from courtyard to sea. It had been years since the last true crisis. The fever that swept from Oldtown to Gulltown had left the realm bruised, but not broken. And now the peace Sansa and Gendry had seeded took on a character all its own. Not fragile but living, the kind of peace that could survive a generation. Robb Baratheon, Edric's eldest, stood on the ramparts, his cloak wrapped close, his breath misting in the icy air. At his side was his youngest sister, Mara, still a girl, her cheeks red with cold and eyes bright with the pride of youth. "There are more children in the yard than ever before," she said, nodding to where young lords from the Reach and the North played at swords with Stormlander fisherfolk, distinctions blurring with each tumble in the snow. "Does it ever end, brother?" Robb smiled, his beard thick now, a streak of gray at the temples. "Not if we hold to what was built. Peace is like a hearth fire, Mara. It burns so long as someone tends it." Damn. Mara watched the children for a moment longer, then turned, her gaze solemn. "And what if a storm comes? Then we weather it together," he said, his words firm as stone. In the great hall, Lyanna presided over the first council of winter. Her hair was a silvered mane now, her face cut by the years of travel and burden, but her presence still filled the chamber with a rare, indomitable warmth. She had become legend, though she laughed at the notion. The lady without borders, whose name was known from White Harbor to Sunspear. The council had grown in her lifetime. There were riverlords, Dornish traders, maesters, even 2 former Sellswords who'd proved their worth in the years of rebuilding. On this morning, the topics ranged from the harvest's last stores to the construction of a new hospice on the King's Road. From a dispute over fishing rights at the Mander's Mouth to the shipment of Braavosi glass for a new school. Through every debate, Lyanna listened first. Her questions pointed but kind, her decisions carried on the wind like seeds. It was during a pause, when the fire snapped and the councillors took their mugs of mulled wine, that a message was placed in Lyanna's hands. The parchment was thick and sealed with blue wax, the mark of the Eyrie. Robb watched as Lyanna broke the seal, her eyes scanning the lines. "Lord Arryn invites us to the Vale for the spring moot," she announced. "They want us to mediate a border dispute and advise on a matter of succession." A murmur swept the council. The Vale had always been proud. slow to join the new order, but no longer closed. Robb leaned in. "Will you go, Aunt?" She smiled. "It would be poor form to refuse. And if they ask for counsel, it is our duty to give it." Robb nodded, thinking of his own father's words. Trust is the only coin that truly buys peace. After the council, Lyanna found him in the yard, overseeing the training of a fresh crop of pages. "Come with me," she said, her voice gentle. "The time is coming when you'll have to lead more than just Storm's End." Robb hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish. I'll send word to Winterfell and Highgarden. Let them know the council is traveling." Memnemighty. Preparations were swift. The realm was accustomed to movement now. Lords and ladies going forth as envoys, bringing not armies but words. Robb traveled with a small retinue. Mera insisted on coming, and so did Jorah, his cousin and closest friend, along with 2 scholars, a healer, and half a dozen guards. Lyanna led the column out under the winter sky, her banner white with the snow, her laughter loud as a bell. The journey was slow, but bright. They passed through villages where the harvest was lean, but the spirits high, where children crowded the roads to wave, and old men offered flasks of honey wine for a story or a blessing. Lyanna spoke to everyone. She asked the mayor of a marsh town how the eels were running. She praised a crone's embroidery in a riverside inn. She listened as a smith's daughter confessed to loving a baker's son, the kind of dispute Sansa had settled 1,000 times. At each stop, Robb saw again the power of this quiet diplomacy. The people trusted Lyanna, not for her birth, but for her years of labor. They trusted Robb too, now that he led with humility rather than command. And he found himself remembering every lesson from his mother and father, every story of how unity was built, not forced. In the Vale, the Eyrie was awash with sunlight on blue stone. Lord Arryn was young, just come of age, his mother watching closely from her place at his right hand. The great moot was tense at first. Houses Hunter and Corbray bristled over the borders, voices raised, tempers tested. But Lyanna, and then Robb, led them back from the brink with patience, inviting every voice, weighing every grievance. 3 days of debate followed. Lyanna drew the children together, nieces and wards from each house, and set them to games and lessons in the yard. Robb held evening councils where grievances were spoken freely, sometimes soothed with a joke or a tale of older quarrels mended. By the end, the borderlines were redrawn to everyone's satisfaction, and the matter of succession resolved by allowing the Lady Arryn's daughter to be fostered for a season at Storm's End, tied the Vale more closely into the great circle of peace. Their return home was slow, the snows deeper, but spirits high. At every stop, Robb heard the news. The moot had been a triumph, the Vale at last at ease, old rivals now trading wool and iron for the first time in decades. "You are your mother's son," said an old lord in Gulltown, "and your aunt's too. Your word is as sure as theirs ever was." Back at Storm's End, Mara ran to the yard with word from Winterfell. Arya had arrived again, bringing with her a train of traders from distant lands and a message of kinship from the free folk beyond the wall. She brought stories of sunless forests and whale bones big as barns, of a new city on the frozen sea where former wildlings lived alongside runaways from the north, and even Valemen seeking a fortune. The council welcomed Arya with laughter and awe. She sparred with Jorah and Mara, and afterwards sat with Lyanna and Robb, trading tales long into the night. As the snows thickened, Robb found himself often alone in the old solar, sorting letters, tending to reports. He thought often of legacy, of his mother, his father, Lyanna, and the dozens who had helped build and keep this peace. His own children, now just past infancy, tumbled in the snow below his window, as free as he'd ever dreamed. One night, as the wind howled and the hearth burned low, Lyanna came to him. "You look worried." He nodded. "It's a good peace, but how long can it last? The world is wide, and storms always come again." She sat beside him, her hand warm and work-worn. "That's the burden and the gift. We can't know how long, Robb. All we can do is teach the next ones to value what's been built, to trust each other, to keep the doors open." Robb smiled, comforted. "You sound like Mother." Lyanna chuckled. If I do, then I've done something right. Spring returned in time. Slow and green and full of life. The snows melted from the ramparts, and the land awakened again. Ships arrived from Bravos, from Lys, even from distant Volantis. The council grew bolder, inviting magisters and scholars to teach and to learn. The lords of the realm sent their children to Storm's End and to Winterfell, not as hostages, but as students, as friends. Years slipped by. Robb's hair silvered, his children grew strong and clever, and Mara, once the youngest, became a wise advisor in her own right, ever reminding the council that peace required constant tending. Lyanna, old and revered, finally settled at Storm's End, telling stories to every child who would listen, always finishing with the words Sansa had taught her. Peace is made in the choices we make when no one is watching. When, at last, Lyanna passed from the world, it was in her sleep, wrapped in her favorite furs, the windows opened to the sea's song. The realm mourned as one. Bells ringing from White Harbor to Sunspear, candles burning in every window, stories shared at every fire. Robb led the rites himself, his voice clear, his heart full. "We are not what we were," he said to the crowded hall, "but we are what she hoped we would become. The peace she tended is now our duty to keep. Let no one forget the promise that binds us." And the people did not forget. Storm's End became the home of unity, the place where every season was marked by festivals and councils, where the banners of the great houses flew side by side. The children born into this world grew up learning stories of hardship and courage, of the direwolf and the stag, who built something better than what they inherited. Peace was not perfect. There were storms, always, and seasons when hunger and jealousy threatened, but never again did the realm splinter as it once had. The memory of Sansa and Gendry, of Edric and Lyanna, lived on in every compromise, every shared meal, every hand extended across old lines. The world spun forward, but their story endured, a story of wounds mended, hearts opened, and a peace kept bright in the heart of every child who called Westeros home.